Please, we'll begin the day routine presenting and reading petitions. Presenting reports of committees. Tabling reports, regulations, and other papers. Statements by ministers. Government notice of motion. The Honourable Minister of Tourism, Culture and Heritage.
Very good.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas 5 Nova Scotians chosen from a field of 137 nominations will soon be invested into the prestigious Order of Nova Scotia. Whereas the 2004 recipients include Emery Camo of Saulnieville, Donald Michael Julian of Truro, Major Mariel Mosier of Halifax, Oscar Hugh Hewitt Wong of Glenmargaret, and Sherman Zwicker of Lunenburg. Whereas the Order of Nova Scotia, established in 2001, is the highest honour bestowed by the province and once again recognizes very diverse yet significant contributions made by exceptional Nova Scotians. Therefore, be it resolved that members of this House salute those Nova Scotians chosen as this year's inductees into the Order of Nova Scotia and applaud their lasting contributions to our province. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waivers. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Hereby give notice in a future day shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas to help meet the water needs of Nova Scotia farmers, a $3.26 million 4-year federal program or provincial plan was announced in August. And whereas under the program, farmers can apply for infrastructure such as irrigation systems, wells, and ponds. And whereas the province's farming community has been calling for assistance, especially after 3 years of drought and after a year of floods. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this legislature applaud the advent of the program, which will offer needed support to our farmers to complete with the trials of unexpected weather extremes which have hit Nova Scotia in recent years. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waivers. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future date I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas this spring, the journal The Scientist conducted a survey of postdoctoral fellows called the best places for postdocs. Whereas under the non-U.S. institutions category, Dalhousie University was ranked #1 and was ranked 4th overall in a competition which rated universities across the U.S. and in Western Europe as well as in Canada. Whereas a principal reason cited for the high standing was Dell's emphasis on teamwork. Therefore, be resolved that all members of this House recognize and congratulate Dalhousie University for its for the high ranking it received in the scientist survey on the environment offered to research teams. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waivers. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Tourism, Culture and Heritage.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future date I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the United Way of Halifax Region invests in community development programs and initiatives to build our extraordinary community. Whereas the provincial government's 2004 United Way campaign was officially kicked off this week with the United Race, and the Department of Tourism, Culture and Heritage team won this event, along with an award for the most sportsmanlike team. Whereas provincial government staff continue to build on the success of each annual campaign by surpassing their financial goals. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House commend the efforts of provincial government staff and the United Way for making a difference in our community and extend best wishes for a successful 2004 campaign. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waivers. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Hereby give notice in a future day shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas farmers are constantly adapting new technologies and improving their skills as business managers, exporters, and environmentalists in order to provide safe, high-quality food, and whereas farmers make an important contribution to our economy, and whereas this Sunday, 46 farms in Nova Scotia will participate in Open Farm Day, a day when the general public is invited to visit a local farm and learn about agriculture. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House congratulate the participants of this event and encourage people to take every opportunity to visit a farm this weekend. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waivers. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Responsible Emergency Measures Organization.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Amherst Regional High School track and field team took their 11th straight Nova Scotia Athletic Federation Division II provincial banner in June, and whereas Coach Mike Roach has retired from teaching at the end of June of this year, having spent the last 11 years building a strong track and field program that has continually paid dividends, and whereas Mike reflected on his 11 years saying he had a lot of fun, and I do everything for the kids, nothing else matters. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the House join me in sending our congratulations to the Amherst Regional High School track and field team of the 03-04 season, and all the best to Coach Roach on his retirement. And I request waiver of notice.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Responsible Emergency Measures Organization.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I should move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas C-Vision, located in the Amherst Area Industrial Park, purchased the assets of the former Celestica operation 2.5 years ago, starting with no employees, no contract, and no government assistance. Whereas just days after announcing the creation of 60 new jobs to its present workforce of 40, C-Vision has signed a contract with Canlight, one of Canada's largest lighting manufacturers. And whereas this added to a recent contract with Scotia Aircraft on the maritime helicopter team to replace the Sea King at their new facilities. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House join with me in sending our congratulations to C-Vision President Chuck Cartmell and his employees, and wish them continued growth and prosperity in the future. I respectfully request waiver of notice.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. Introduction of bills. The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia, Municipal Relations.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act Respecting the Municipal Taxation of Natural Gas Distribution System.
Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia Municipal Relations begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act Respecting the Municipal Taxation of a Natural Gas Distribution System.
Bill 93, entitled An Act Respecting the Municipal Taxation of a Natural Gas Distribution System.
This bill will be read a second time at a future date. The Honourable Member for Pictou West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to table a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 293 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Motor Vehicle Act.
The Honourable Member for Pictou West begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 293 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Motor Vehicle Act.
Bill 94, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 293 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Motor Vehicle Act.
This bill will be read a second time at a future date. The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 6 of the Acts of 2001, the Land Registration Act.
The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 6 of the Acts of 2001, the Land Registration Act.
Bill 95, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 6 of the Acts of 2001, the Land Registration Act.
Or this bill be read a second time at a future date. The Honourable Member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 1, the 1992 supplement of the Revised Statutes of 1989, the House of Assembly Act.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton West begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 1, 1992 supplement of the revised statutes 1989, the House of Assembly Act.
Bill 96, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 1, 1992 Supplement of the Revised Statutes 1989, the House of Assembly Act.
Or this bill be read a second time at a future date. The Honorable Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill which is entitled An Act to Change the Name of the University College of Cape Breton and to amend Chapter 484 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the University College of Cape Breton Act, and related statutes.
The Honorable Minister of Education begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Change the Name of the University College of Cape Breton and to amend Chapter 484 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the University College of Cape Breton Act, and related statutes.
Bill 97, entitled An Act to Change the Name of the University College of Cape Breton and to amend Chapter 484 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the University College of Cape Breton Act, and related statutes.
Or this bill be read a second time at a future date. The Honorable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia Municipal Relations.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to amend Chapter 18 of the Acts of 1998, the Municipal Government Act.
The Honorable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia Municipal Relations begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to amend Chapter 18 of the Acts of 1998, the Municipal Government Act.
Bill 98, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 18 of the Acts of 1998, the Municipal Government Act.
Or this bill be read a second time at a future date. The Honorable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia Municipal Relations.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to amend Chapter 494 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Vital Statistics Act.
The Honorable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia Municipal Relations begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to amend Chapter 494 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Vital Statistics Act.
Bill 99, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 494 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Vital Statistics Act.
The bill be read a second time at a future date. The Honorable Member for Kings West.
I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 18 of the Acts of 1998, the Municipal Government Acts.
The Honorable Member for Kings West begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to amend Chapter 18 of the Acts of 1998, the Municipal Government Act.
Bill 100, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 18 of the Acts of 1998, the Municipal Government Act.
Or this bill be read a second time at a future date. Notice of motion. The Honourable Member for Cape Breton Nova.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas working in the steel industry has become a dangerous and hazardous job for many years, and whereas in closure and cleanup of Sydney Steel, another worker's life has been lost due to the industry. And whereas retired steel worker Roy Marchand lost his life in an industrial accident while securing steel beams for a hoisting crane. Therefore, be it resolved, this House send along its deepest condolences and sympathies to the family of Roy Marchand and all workers who have lost their lives in industrial accidents in this province. Mr. Speaker, I request notice of waiver and passage without debate.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Counterminded, nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll put this in for my constituent. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Yesterday, in a tragic workplace accident, retired steelworker Roy Marchand of Dutchbrook was killed on the Sydney Steel demolition site. And whereas Mr. Marchand was trying to secure a load of steel beams being hoisted by a crane, and whereas this tragedy highlights the importance of workplace safety, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House pass on their condolences to Sharon Marchand and all members of the Marchand family. And I would ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Colchester North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Tatamagouche Elementary School is one of 2 Nova Scotia elementary schools selected by today's Parent magazine as one of the top 40 great schools in Canada, and whereas a child psychiatrist nominated Tatamagouche Elementary because of the school's success in assisting children with special needs, and whereas Tatamagouche Elementary has devoted learning center staffed by a special education expert and a reading specialist, therefore be it resolved that members of this House of Assembly congratulate the staff and students from Tatamagouche Elementary for being chosen in the top 40 after today's Parent magazine received 300 nominations from more than 150 schools. And Mr. Speaker, I ask waivers.
Request for waivers. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried. The honourable member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas over a year ago, the Atlantic Provinces Economic Council staff and governors met for a day-long session on the economic prospects and policy priorities for Atlantic Canada. And whereas discussions at this session focused on concerns that Atlantic Canada is slowly slipping behind other provinces as a place to invest and prosper, and whereas among the specific concerns requiring attention is the continued out-migration of well-educated young people and a concentration of employment in low-wage sectors, therefore be it resolved that the Minister of Economic Development explain to the people of Nova Scotia what exactly he plans to do to stop the exodus of many of our best and brightest youth and young adults who emigrate elsewhere in search of jobs that pay a living wage with the possibility for real advancement. And Mr. Speaker, I seek waiver and passage without debate.
Is it agreed? I hear a no. Notice is tabled. The honourable member for Victoria the Lakes.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Minister of Natural Resources has written me to saying that he has asked the Conflict of Interest Commissioner to examine his conduct as a Cabinet Minister and that he is prepared to abide by any decision of the Commissioner. And whereas, however, the Ministerial Code of Conduct, Section 8, indicates that only a resolution of the House of Assembly or a request of the Executive Council may call upon the Conflict of Interest Commissioner to investigate a complaint under the Code. And whereas such an investigation will clear the air and attempt to assure Nova Scotians that the Minister is not in a real or perceived conflict of interest with regard to the awarding of a government tender to Trico Holdings. Therefore, be it resolved, the members of this House unanimously call upon the Conflict of Interest Commissioner to initiate an investigation as to whether the Minister is in violation of the Ministerial Code of Conduct and that the Commissioner write back to the House with its findings. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver and a recorded vote.
Question for waivers. Is it agreed? I hear several noes. Noes is tabled. The honourable member for Guysborough Sheet Harbour.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution.
Order, please. The honourable member for Guysborough Sheet Harbour.
Whereas the Nova Scotia Lighthouse Preservation Society began preservation of the Queensport Lighthouse in 2000, and whereas presently the Guysborough municipality is working to preserve the lighthouse as a historical monument, and whereas the Nova Scotia Lighthouse Society is a non-profit society set up to protect and preserve 150 of the lighthouses in Nova Scotia. Therefore, be it resolved that members of this House commend the Nova Scotia Lighthouse Preservation Society on their efforts to protect and preserve lighthouses across the province and wish them continued success in the future. And I request waiver of notice.
Question for waivers. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Halifax Regional School Board is the only school board in Nova Scotia to create a permanent seat for students at the board table, and whereas Javesh Parasaram, a student of Prince Andrew High, will serve as student advisor, and Jordan Warford, a student at Millwood High School, was elected as deputy advisor, and whereas they were succeeded by Christina Clark of Auburn Drive High School and Nicole Delaney of Halifax West High School, the first students to serve on the board. Therefore, be it resolved that this House thank Miss Clark and Miss Delaney for representing students while on the Halifax Regional School Board, and also wish Mr. Parasaram and Mr. Warford all the best as they represent students on the Halifax Regional School Board. and I request waiver.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cape Breton South.
Mr. Speaker, I'll be reading this on behalf of the honourable member from Glace Bay. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas ALS, or Lou Gehrig's disease, is a progressive neuromuscular disease that can strike anyone irrespective of age, sex, or ethnic origin. And whereas ALS is the most common cause of neurological death in Canada, claiming the lives of 2 or 3 Canadians every day. And whereas on September 25, 2004, Walk to Defeat ALS events aimed to raise funds for research and local support services will be held in Halifax, Sydney, and Truro. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate staff and volunteers of the ALS Society for their dedication and support year-round, and extend our best wishes for successful Walk to Defeat ALS events throughout Nova Scotia on September 25, 2004. I would ask for waiver, Mr. Speaker.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. Order, please. The honourable member for Pictou East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on September 11th, for the first time in Canada, the 7th Annual International Burn Camp Conference was held at Sutherland's River, Pictou County. And whereas volunteer support from the Pictou County firefighters made this event possible, along with camp counselors and volunteers from England and the United States who met to discuss ways to improve local camp crisis intervention and training. And whereas during the conference a red maple was planted by members of the Nova Scotia Firefighters Burn Treatment Society in memory of the firefighters who lost their lives in the terrorist attack. And therefore be it resolved that members of the House join me in thanking the Pictou County firefighters, the chair of the Nova Scotia Firefighters Burn Treatment Society, Dave Collier, and camp volunteers for their dedication and courage and efforts to educate and update the community. And I seek waiver of notice.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Halifax Shabakto.
I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Wednesday, September 22nd, 2004 was International Car-Free Day, and whereas the use of cars, trucks and motorcycles accounts for approximately 30% of provincial greenhouse gas emissions, and whereas Car-Free Day has been celebrated since 2001, and forums and alternative transportation events were organized this year by TRACS, a project of the Ecology Action Centre. Therefore, be it resolved that the organizers of Car-Free Day be commended by this House on their efforts to inform Nova Scotians of the need to use fewer petroleum-based fuel-burning vehicles and to encourage Nova Scotians to cycle, walk, run, and even rollerblade to their destinations whenever possible. Mr. Speaker, I seek waiver of notice, passage without debate.
Mr. Waivers, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. Order, please. The honourable member Kings West.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas yesterday in question period, the Premier was asked to produce his plan for health care and the associated costs, given that he can no longer point fingers at Ottawa for not properly funding health care. Whereas neither a plan nor costs were revealed as a result of the request, and whereas one would assume that a government would have developed a prioritized plan ready to be implemented as soon as additional funding was made available from the federal government. Therefore, be it resolved that the absence of a plan speaks volumes about leadership on the issue of health care and does not bode well for much-needed improvements in the health care system. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver. Hear several noes. Notice is tabled. The honourable member for Pictou West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas this year marks the 50th anniversary of firefighters raising money for muscular dystrophy in Canada, and whereas the Pictou County Firefighters Association has been named the #1 fundraiser for muscular dystrophy in the Atlantic provinces, and whereas already this year the association has raised $15,750 for muscular dystrophy through a boot drive in April, the first walk, wheel or run Atlantic rally held earlier this summer, and most recently through a car wash at the Highland Square Mall and the Aberdeen Business Centre. Therefore, it be resolved that this Nova Scotia Legislature congratulate all the volunteer firefighters as members of the Pictou County Firefighters Association for their great efforts in raising needed funds for muscular dystrophy in Canada. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the agricultural industry of Nova Scotia contributes over $1 billion to the economy of Nova Scotia, and whereas on September 26th, the industry will host the 3rd annual Open Farm Day as part of the Canadian Agriculture and Food Celebration, and whereas 46 farms across our province will be open to the public on Sunday in celebration of Open Farm Day, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House recognize the contribution that farmers make to Nova Scotia and encourage all Nova Scotians to participate in Open Farm Day. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice.
Request for waiver is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Dartmouth South, Portland Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Peter Worden left England to settle in Cape Cod in 1638, and whereas some of his descendants came to Nova Scotia as loyalists, and whereas the Worden Family Association, representing family members from across North America, is having its biannual reunion this coming weekend at the Holiday Inn Harbourview in Dartmouth. Therefore, be it resolved that the Nova Scotia Legislature extend congratulations to the Worden Family Association and wish all its members a very enjoyable family reunion. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Nova Scotia has been recognized for its waste reduction initiatives, and whereas the town of Mahone Bay is looking to further its waste reduction by encouraging recycling in public places and has implemented a pilot project to reduce the amount of waste going to the local landfill. And whereas the town of Mahone Bay has installed new waste containers around the town, which are built to encourage the public to separate their garbage, which promotes recycling and reduces landfill waste. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the House of Assembly congratulate the town of Mahone Bay on their waste reduction effort and promotion of recycling within the town. Mr. Speaker, I request waivers of notice and passage without debate.
Waivers are agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on August the 29, 2004, the Morden Christ Church celebrated its 150th anniversary, and whereas the members of the Morden community came together in rebuilding after the initial church suffered a disastrous fire in 1905, and whereas the church has been a symbol of both family and friendship in the community, therefore be it resolved, members of this House acknowledge and celebrate this 150-year milestone with the members of the Morden community and hope that Christ Church will be enjoyed for many years to come. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Question for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the honourable ministers for allowing this motion to be reconsidered. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas some outdoor solid wood burning appliances are notoriously ineffective because of their methods of operation, which creates a slow burning or smoldering fire that results in a large amount of combustion byproducts being released. And whereas many of these byproducts are hazardous or toxic, causing a worsening of existing heart and respiratory conditions, eyes, nose, and throat irritations, and headaches. And whereas some of these outdoor solid wood burning appliances are used for heating facilities and burning combustion debris without regards for the surrounding neighborhood, therefore be it resolved that the Minister of Environment, in consultation with the Minister of Energy, consider reviewing the use of outdoor solid wood burning appliances and their effect on the environment. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver and passage without debate.
Question for waivers is agreed. I hear a no. Notice is tabled. The honourable member for Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas 14-year-old Tyler Williams of Middleton has been played hockey for 10 years with both Middleton Minor Hockey and the Western Valley Minor Hockey Association. And whereas through hard work and dedication to his training and skill development, Tyler Williams has honed his hockey skill. And whereas Tyler Williams has been invited to play for the Nova Scotia Under-15 hockey team, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate Tyler Williams and wish him success with his hockey career. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice.
Question for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Waverly, Fall River, Beaverbank.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the coaches, club members, and supporting families of the Chima Canoe Club of Waverly represented Canada at the 2004 Olympics in Athens, Greece by sending 4 competitors and a coach. And whereas paddlers Mike Scarola, Karen Furneaux, Gillian Delicio, and Richard Dalton, along with award-winning coach Chum Ledvorsky, represented the Chima Canoe Club, Nova Scotia, and Canada at the 2004 Olympics. And whereas these competitors represent our community with distinction by qualifying for the finals in all of their respective competitions. Therefore, be it resolved, and all members of this House join me in sending our congratulations to the Chima Canoe Club and wishing them continued success. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice.
Request for waivers, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Multicultural Association of Nova Scotia came into existence on July 1st, 1975, and was successfully worked towards creating a sense of belonging and respect for all cultures. Whereas Barbara Campbell has served as Executive Director of the Multicultural Association of Nova Scotia since July 1975, successfully raising the profile of multiculturalism during her 3 decades of service. And whereas Barbara Campbell will be retiring on November 25th, 2004. Therefore be resolved by all members of this House, honor Barbara Campbell for her long and dedicated service to the Multicultural Association of Nova Scotia and wish her well in her well-earned retirement. And I'd ask for waiver.
Request for waivers, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on August the 5th, I was the first participant to have their vehicle tested at the Let's Drive Green Emissions Clinic in HRM, which was offered by the Ecology Action Centre Environment Canada. And whereas the event was a great success with 170 vehicles tested, of which 90% passed the emission test, whereas all participants learned how they could reduce the level of harmful emissions they emit, thus improving air quality for all. Therefore, be it resolved that this House commend the Ecology Action Centre, Environment Canada, and all those who participated in the Let's Drive Green Emissions Clinic. And I request waiver.
Request for waivers, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Floridians spent their last summer days recovering from the massive damage inflicted by Hurricanes Charlie and Francis, whereas millions of state residents, including many Nova Scotian snowbirds, were severely affected by the hurricanes, inflicting significant damage on their homes, their possessions, and their lives, whereas Atlantic Canadians, always at the ready to help their neighbours, did so once again as the Red Cross Society sent volunteers from our region and from across Canada in August and September to assist with efforts to help those affected. Therefore, be it resolved, all members of the House offer our gratitude to the volunteers of the Canadian Red Cross Society, including many ham radio operators who reached across the border to our friends to the south to lend a helping hand, and also wish those ravaged by hurricanes all the best as they begin to rebuild their lives. So, Mr. Speaker, I respectfully request waiver of notice.
Request for waivers, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Halifax, Shabakto.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas there will be consolidation of the 2 major high schools located on the Halifax Peninsula. And whereas both previous high schools, St. Patrick's High School and Queen Elizabeth High School, had auditoriums which were separate from their gymnasiums. And whereas the new school will be a major community facility, therefore be it resolved that the Department of Education include an auditorium in the plans for the new school and cover the cost of its construction. I seek waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Question waivers, is it agreed? Hear no. Notice is tabled. The Honourable Minister for Human Resources.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Lunenburg County, in particular, and Nova Scotia in general, take pride in their well-educated students, and whereas Nova Scotia students have been very successful at home and abroad, and whereas Donica Patti, a former student in Lunenburg County, has been named Ambassador to Cambodia, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House join me in congratulating Ambassador Patti upon her recent appointment and wish her well in her exciting career. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver and notice of passage without debate.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Countermanded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Maritime Paper Products Limited was one of the first tenants of Burnside Industrial/Business Park in Dartmouth when it opened in 1967, and whereas the company continues to be a key employer in Metro, providing employment for 170 skilled employees producing quality paper products, and whereas on July 2004, Maritime Paper Products Limited embarked on an $18 million capital expansion project as part of an ongoing modernization program which will keep Burnside production plant competitive. Therefore, be it resolved that the Nova Scotia Legislature commend President Gary Johnson of Maritime Paper Products Limited for his confidence in the local skilled labor force and the Dartmouth location of the company to invest $18 million in expansion. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver and passage without debate.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Countermanded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Cape Breton Search and Rescue Association is celebrating its 35th anniversary on Saturday, and whereas volunteers are the cornerstone of ground search and rescue in Nova Scotia, and Nova Scotia is very fortunate to have such skilled and dedicated volunteers who will make themselves available at a moment's notice. And whereas the Cape Breton Ground Search and Rescue Association is the oldest search and rescue association in Nova Scotia, therefore be it resolved the members of this House recognize the valuable efforts of all those involved with the Cape Breton Ground Search and Rescue Association and thank them for their dedication and to helping others throughout the years. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I respectfully request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
You're welcome. There's a request for waivers. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Countermanded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Cape Breton Nova.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on September 26, 2004, Joyce Murphy, a long-standing resident of Whitney Pier, will celebrate her 80th birthday. And whereas Joyce arrived in Canada as a beautiful young war bride, and whereas despite the fact her husband passed away at an early age, she showed tremendous perseverance and raised 8 children who have made their mark across this great country. Therefore, be it resolved, the members of the Legislative Assembly extend their heartfelt congratulations to Joyce Murphy on this momentous occasion and to wish her many years of health and prosperity in the days ahead. Mr. Speaker, I request notice of waiver and passage without debate.
Request for waivers, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Countermanded, nay. Motion is carried. Orders of the day, the Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, before we carry on with government business, could we have, with no objection, the reversion to tabling reports, regulations, and other papers?
Agreed. Agreed. Okay, revert to tabling reports, regulations, and other papers. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's my honor to table the 13th annual report of the Law Reform Commission of Nova Scotia for the period from April 1st, 2003 to March 31st, 2004.
The document is tabled. Government business. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Speaker, would you please call the order of business public bills for second reading?
Public bills for second reading.
Mr. Speaker, would you please call Bill number 90?
Bill number 90, the Highway 104 Western Line Act.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there are several bills that come before this.
Order, please. Order, please. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Come before this House where they are described by their proponent as being strictly housekeeping. I can assure you this one is strictly housekeeping. It simply orders that the 104 Western Alignment Corporation submit on an annual basis a report to the Minister of Transportation, who in turn will table that report in the House. The reason for this bill, Mr. Speaker, because that has been common practice, is simply that the matter was raised by the Auditor General, and we are complying with that particular request. Thank you. I move second reading, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Pictou West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise for a few minutes to speak here on Bill number 90. an act to amend Chapter 4 of the Acts of 1995, the Highway 104 Western Alignment Act. Bill 90, it just makes me think of an infamous Bill 90 was in the House here a few years ago, but I guess it doesn't have the notoriety of that particular bill. But anyway, as the minister indicated, this is a housekeeping bill, and but still nonetheless important. It is important that the report of the Cobequid Pass Toll Highway Corporation be given to the minister on an annual basis, and I'm really not quite sure why this hasn't been done in past years, these number of years since the toll highway was set up. But it's a good move to have it in the minister's hands finally, although I'm sure one way or another he's had access to it. But certainly the Auditor General has had reason to see it on an annual basis, but now it's good to officially, at least the minister will also have it. So I certainly support that particular aspect of the bill. And perhaps also now that the minister has it, he'll have a chance to look at it carefully and really look at this whole issue of the money that's coming in on the toll highway. Every indication is that it's more than adequate, more than enough money coming in to pay off the debt of the corporation. And I know it's a 30-year payback period. I think to 2026 is my records here. That'll be paid off, but every indication is it's going to be paid off much, much sooner, and the sooner the better, absolutely. There's nowhere else in Canada where there's a toll highway, and that I know of on the Trans-Canada Highway. Now, there is one north of Toronto, I think, but that's just in the city of Toronto. I think it's Highway 407, but it's not on the TCH that I'm aware of. So we have the distinction or the misfortune or of having the only toll highway on our Trans-Canada Highway system from Newfoundland to British Columbia. So when that report comes to the minister, hopefully he'll have a chance to look at it thoroughly and decide that perhaps there is some way that we can get rid of this thing once and for all. It's scheduled to be paid off in another 22 years, but there's every indication that it's going to be paid off long, long before then. Mr. Speaker, as you will know personally from your riding in Cumberland South, I'm sure there are many travelers, many workers in your riding that have to travel across the toll every day to get to and from work, perhaps living in Spring Hill or Amherst, and then they have to travel down to Truro or elsewhere to find employment. So they're paying twice a day, going back and forth, and it's especially difficult for local residents that depend on their employment back and forth. It's also hard on everybody. It's certainly hard on the trucking industry. $3 an axle, I think, is the price right now, and that's a lot of money for that. And eventually, the consumer is paying. Tourists, are not accustomed to paying tolls in Canada, and all of a sudden they see a sign 5 miles down the road there's a toll, and as they get there, they think maybe it's 50 cents or whatever, as you're perhaps used to on toll highways in the USA. All of a sudden they have to dish out $4. Hopefully they have it in their wallet or purse. So it's a lot of money, a lot of revenue coming in, and while there's been some discussion that the feds have some role or responsibility in this, while they did put money into it initially, my understanding that this Highway 104 Western Alignment Corporation is a wholly owned subsidiary of the province of Nova Scotia. It's owned by the province. You have control over it. And I think the sooner you can take a good look, Mr. Minister, at that annual report when it comes to you and decide that it's time to get rid of the toll, the better it will be for Nova Scotia, the better it will be for the trucking industry, for the tourists of this province, and certainly for the local residents that live within the area. So I hope the minister, now that he'll have the report in his hand on a more timely basis, will take every move and consideration to get rid of the toll once and for all, and so that the whole province and the whole country will have a Trans-Canada highway system that is toll-free. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I support this bill moving on to the next stage in the legislative process, and I look forward to it going to law amendments. Thank you.
Now I'm a member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will be brief on this particular piece of legislation. This legislation is obviously quite precipitous, I'm sure, from the minister's perspective. But the only thing I would add with regards to this particular piece of legislation is the fact that this annual report will not be provided to the minister. I hope that will not preclude the minister from making it available to all members of the House, as has been the practice in the past, because that seems to be kind of an inference there that it will be, well, legislatively it will be provided to the minister, but there's no assurance that it will be provided to all members of the House, and indeed to the people of Nova Scotia on in the future, which has been the custom. So I would lay that before the minister, and perhaps he could give some assurance, quality assurance on that, that will continue as has been the practice. And with that, Mr. Speaker, our caucus will certainly be supporting it going on to law amendments and hopefully for ratification on a future day. Thank you.
Recognize the Honourable Minister of Transportation and Public Works. Close debate on Bill number 90. The Honourable Minister.
I appreciate the interventions by the two members opposite on this bill. In particular, Mr. Speaker, perhaps I should mention that the tolls collected on the Highway 104, of course, are going to pay off the bondholders for that for the particular highway, and there are agreements in place between the bondholders and the province of Nova Scotia, which do require certain things to happen with regard to the tolls on the highway. But however, the financial situation of the 104 Highway Western Alignment Corporation is very sound. They have money in the bank, and there is every indication at the present time anyway that the bondholders will be paid off long before the time allotted in the original agreement. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm sure everybody will breathe a sigh of relief when we pay off those bonds and we no longer have a toll highway. Having said that, Mr. Speaker, I would also like to address the matter of tabling the report in the House, which is the intent of the bill. In point of fact, that the bill is the report is to the minister, and the minister reports to the House, the same as we do with the Bridge Commission. So, Mr. Speaker, that report will be made available to all members of the House on an annual basis and will be tabled in the House by the Minister of Transportation. So, Mr. Speaker, I now move third reading of Bill number 90.
Fine. Motion is for second reading of Bill number 90. Is the host ready for the question? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried.
Entitled an Act to amend Chapter 4 of the Acts of 1995, the Highway 104 Western Alignment Act.
Order this bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, would you please call Bill number 92?
Bill number 92, the Motor Vehicle Act. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Bill number 92 enacts a number of amendments to the Motor Vehicle Act, and they deal with various matters. I won't elaborate on them all because some are simply changes that are of very little consequence in reality. But, Mr. Speaker, there are a number of things in the Motor Vehicle Act amendment that I think are of some importance. For instance, it incorporates legislation respecting transit priority signals, and that is not presently addressed in the present Act. This amendment, Mr. Speaker, I would suggest to you indirectly will support the transit systems across Canada, across Nova Scotia, particularly in HRM, and it will provide some incentive perhaps for more riders to travel by public transit. Cole Harbour and Sackville have been identified as the two priorities transit corridors in HRM, and they will provide corridors to and from those particular regions to downtown Halifax. There will be a system of dedicated lanes and dedicated signals to expedite that traffic, Mr. Speaker. If we can get more people riding the transit systems, obviously we're going to get cars off the highways, and that is a most desirable thing, Mr. Speaker. The second part of the Act deals with roundabouts, and it's one that's of great interest to the media anyway, it seems, but But in point of fact, Mr. Speaker, the roundabout is simply a transition from a system of an intersection system that we call a rotary to a more streamlined system with different rules applying to expedite traffic through that intersection. Roundabouts are the main mode for intersections in Europe, as those of you who have driven in Europe already know. We've been very slow in North America to adapt to the modern roundabout, which is quite different to the original concept of a roundabout, which was indeed a rotary. Having mixed that up, Mr. Speaker, I can tell you that in North America the modern roundabout is being accepted, and in the U.S. now you'll find many of them as you journey around the highway system in the U.S. In Canada, they're becoming in vogue in Ontario and out west in Manitoba and Saskatchewan. And we are at the present time envisaging at least 3 roundabouts in Nova Scotia. Roundabouts, yes. we are envisaging that we will have eventually 3 in the immediate future in Nova Scotia. One would be the Armdale Rotary, and I don't know when that's going to occur. That's up to HRM, but however, the Armdale Rotary will eventually become a roundabout. The intersection as you come off the Canso Causeway and you get into that spaghetti lanes of roads as you come off, and the honourable member says it was designed for ease for the travelling public to reach a certain motel. That could well be, Mr. Speaker. But I'm sure everybody will agree that is an intersection, Mr. Speaker, that does need attention. We're also, when we twin the section of the 101 between Falmouth and Avonport, at Avonport we'll be putting in a modern roundabout as well. So, Mr. Speaker, roundabouts are here, and they are becoming in vogue. And as I mentioned yesterday, Mr. Speaker, we are being innovative in one way, in that we are going to use a space down at Greenwood at the airport to actually paint a roundabout on the tarmac there, so that the traffic advisory people can take a look at it. We can make adjustments to it, and we'll have traffic in that roundabout as a training ground for police, for firefighters, for trucking industry, etc., Mr. Speaker, and I'm sure that it's going to be as successful in Nova Scotia as it presently is in Europe. Included in the amendments, Mr. Speaker, included, Mr. Speaker, in the amendments are an agreement regarding the adoption of a standard for securing loads on commercial vehicles. This will be a North American standard, Mr. Speaker. It is hoped that all states in the U.S. and in Canada, and provinces in Canada, will have signed this agreement by the end of 2005, and in the meantime have put in place standards through legislation for the securing of loads on trucks. And there's one more item, Mr. Speaker, which I've got to come to. And that deals with to modify reset provisions under the graduated license program. When a person is on a graduated license or on that program for 2 years, if they commit certain infractions, at the end of the penalty period for that infraction, they go back and start again another 2 years. There is one penalty in there, though, that seems to be rather harsh, and that is if a person misses an appointment if a person has been called to report to the registrar of motor vehicles for any particular reason and fails to keep that appointment, then they lose their license and they have to start off on the 2 years again. So, Mr. Speaker, that simply takes that out and says at the end of this, or whatever the suspension period is for missing that particular appointment, they go back and carry on with it for their initial 2-year period for the graduated license.
There's too much noise in the chamber. It's very difficult to hear the honourable member. Honourable member has the floor.
So, Mr. Speaker, with those few remarks, I would move second reading of Bill number 92.
The honourable member for Pictou West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the opportunity to have a few minutes to speak on Bill 92, an act to amend Chapter 293 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Motor Vehicle Act. And in a roundabout way, I guess I'm concerned about the minister still talking around in circles, but anyway, we'll have a few comments to some of the aspects of this particular bill. One item that I saw in the bill that I thought was certainly was good was improving the public transit system here in HRM, and a provision for bus priority lanes and the proper signal systems that go with that. I must comment that recently when I was at the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association conference in Quebec City, there were priority lanes for buses there on the main street heading into the old Quebec, into the downtown, and certainly it seemed to work quite smoothly. The bus lanes were running faster than the regular traffic on the right-hand side of the street, and so I assume that would be similar to what's there in that city. So I'd certainly support that idea, and it also encourages more people to use the public transit system, and knowing that they're going to get to work as fast or perhaps faster than they would in their own vehicle. So anything to get more vehicles off the road and to encourage more public transit, certainly I would support. And I'm sure there's other cities in North America and elsewhere that probably have this type of system. And certainly a lot of mornings we have congested highways coming in to work here or into the downtown core in our city, and from the outlying areas such as Cole Harbour and Sackville, some of these areas. So it's a good measure, and I support that. A couple other aspects of the bill, Mr. Speaker, that I think also are good. There's one section in there about securing loads on commercial vehicles, and everybody wants to see secure and safe trucks on our highways and make sure their loads are secure. But the fine at the present time is only $15 if somebody's caught in violation of that, and that's a ridiculously low figure, and certainly hopefully that's going to be up to a level that's much more reasonable, in line with other fines in the industry. There's also a section there around graduated driver's licenses, and about the stop time, I guess, if they don't show up for an appointment. That's good. There's just one thing I'll add to that. I know in a particular case in my riding where I had a call around graduated licenses, and it involved volunteer firemen. Now, as you know, volunteer firemen can be called out at any time of the day or night to fight a fire, and including after midnight. And in this case, that's exactly what happened. A young person who had a graduated license was a volunteer fireman, and he was pulled over and told that, you're past your time. So he was told that he could go to the Registry of Motor Vehicles and get a special permit that would allow him as a volunteer fireman to go. But the difficulty was that he had to pay $35 in order to do that, and that to him seemed a little contradictory that, he's doing a public service, he's out fighting fires on behalf of his community and obeying the law, but then he has to pay a fee in order to do that. So that seemed wrong. So I'll just point it out to the minister that perhaps there's something could be done to accommodate volunteer firemen that wouldn't have to pay extra money. As far as rotaries and roundabouts, I guess the one I'm most familiar with is in the town of Pictou, We have a rotary there for a number of years. I'm not sure, it must be 20, 30 years now it's been there, and that's the one that I hear a bit about from time to time. There have been accidents there on occasion as vehicles enter and meet each other, and there's always some uncertainty as to who has the right to come into the rotary, especially when there's a lot of ferry traffic coming from Prince Edward Island. There's a whole stream of 50 or 60 vehicles rolling on in on the 106 into the rotary, and from time to time there have been accidents. Now, the present system is supposed to be one-on-one. You know, you yield one-on-one as they come into the rotary, but some are not doing that. Maybe it's lack of education. They're not aware that they're supposed to yield as they come in, or on a one-on-one basis. This new system with the roundabouts seems like a good idea, in that traffic would have to yield to traffic already in the circle, and I think that would probably be better than the system where now they're just it's every second vehicle coming in and yielding to each other. So overall, I guess, Mr. Speaker, I think the idea of a roundabout is good. I know there's been interventions from my area about the Pictou Rotary. I think the municipality of Pictou County has sent letters to the minister, and I know individuals have sent letters of concern about the danger of the Rotary way it was set up, and asking if there could be a better way. In fact, there was a study done this summer looking at how it could be improved, and that basically I think they come to the conclusion that a roundabout is the better system that would work. So I'm supportive of anything, I guess, that would improve safety and allow drivers to be in a position to know what they're doing. I think that's the second aspect of this bill, is that there should be some public education. People should know what a roundabout is. They should know how to enter it, what they're supposed to do as they come to it. So I think public education is an important part of letting people know how it should work. So overall, I guess this bill has a variety of aspects to it, but I think it's generally good with those couple changes I've recommended. And so again, I'm looking forward to going to law amendments, and we'll support it from there. Thank you.
Thank you. The honourable member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on this particular piece of legislation, Bill 92, an act to amend Chapter 293 of the revised statutes of 1989, the Motor Vehicle Act, one particular aspect with regards to the issue of standards on trucking, particularly as it relates to interprovincial, I would like to raise a number of issues. Number one, the increasing concern by Nova Scotians on the number of inspections or the lack of inspections on the trucking industry in Nova Scotia. I've received a number of complaints over the last year that the number of inspections has actually decreased in the province of Nova Scotia, particularly for trucking operations coming from outside of Nova Scotia. And I think, Mr. Speaker, that's an issue that I would like to leave with the minister during the course of this particular piece of legislation. The reason being particularly that other provincial jurisdictions, as I'm advised, do not necessarily have as high a standard as we have in Nova Scotia. So the reference on Section 16 to this type of inspection and standardization across, and I believe that's what the minister was referring to in his opening remarks, will kind of provide for a more national standard, and that's very good. That's very positive. However, if we're not doing the inspections, it's very difficult for ourselves to be able to measure as to whether we're achieving that level of comfort and safety on Nova Scotia's highways that we like to project. So perhaps if the minister could provide some more detail on that, that would be certainly helpful. With regards to the issue on the roundabout, well, I would respectfully submit, I hope it'll be a more smashing success than the Micmac Rotary was in Dartmouth. Because it wasn't until they did away with that rotary and put, it wasn't a smashing success. That's the inference. Yeah, that's why they did away with it. Yes, excuse me, Mr. Speaker. The Minister and the Minister of Education knows full well what I'm referring to. And what we have there now is very uniform, safe driving conditions. And the reference has been made to the Armdale Rotary. Well, I would respectfully submit that if the Minister or the officials within the Department of Transportation and Public Works were to formalize the rules of engagement at the Armdale Rotary, then in fact there'd be little need for this roundabout issue that the Minister is referring to, because quite frankly I don't have enough evidence or information to support or oppose it, and other than what the Minister has put before his press conference yesterday and what he has laid before the House here today. And I mean, we have over 300,000 Nova Scotians driving every day, and a certain percentage of those individuals will undoubtedly be using on a future day this roundabout. Now, by direct comparison, if you look at the Armdale Rotary, where for the most part it's an honor system, where one vehicle goes in, the next vehicle is coming from a different direction, it's one in, one out. And so everybody has got essentially the same time sequence, entrance and exit to that process. Whereas with the roundabout, what will happen is somebody during heavy traffic hours, whether it be in let's say early traffic rush in the morning or in the 5 o'clock traffic, a driver could be there for anywhere from 30 seconds up to 5 minutes, because the rules of engagement are such that you have to wait there until there's a break in that traffic. And if everyone is going, continuously through from one traffic flow, that makes it very difficult. It's not like in a regulated light or intersection fashion as what we have over in Dartmouth now, since we've eliminated the Micmac Rotary. So perhaps if the Minister could give us some more detail on that, I think would be very helpful. Because it's good to be able to train all our municipal officials, our policing agencies and traffic officers and inspectors and so on the issue of this roundabout. But what about the people of Nova Scotia? I mean, is it going to be a trial and error basis? Is this what this is going to be all about? I know we're looking, probably 3, 5, maybe 10 years down the road before it really kicks in, but one has to wonder the merit of the way this whole issue has been approached. And I suppose if they are going to be an issue in the future, well, that's fine. But there's very little evidence to suggest that it'll be user-friendly at this point. It seems to be a trial and error basis. And that's really what the Minister has put before the House here, asking for just officials to go down and examine and try out the issue on a tarmac down in Greenwood. Doesn't seem to be very user-friendly to the 300,000 Nova Scotians that are driving every day. And the Minister himself indicated yesterday he wouldn't want to rush a traffic going down to Greenwood, because that in itself would create quite a consternation. So the brochure that he's put out, it's nice and glossy and quite colorful, and it looks nice on paper, but try and put it into reality. If it's anything like the Micmac Rotary, I would respectfully submit that it's not going to be the smashing success that the Minister anticipates that it will. So perhaps if the Minister could ask the officials within the Minister of Education is a little concerned about the word smashing because that infers accidents and insurance liability. And we know what the government has already done on the issue of insurance to the people of Nova Scotia, and I don't think he would want me to go down that road, Mr. Speaker. It might be well advised for the Minister of Education to kind of focus on some educational matters rather than insurance or safety matters on Nova Scotia's highways, because the people of Nova Scotia have already had one bad deal last year. They don't want another bad deal this year. Yes, Mr. Speaker. Yes, Mr. Speaker. Rabbit tracks is really not where we're going to focus on here today. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I will conclude my remarks and allow the more eloquent orators from the Socialist Party to explain why they would support these roundabouts when there's little evidence to support. But I believe we should certainly support it going on to law amendments. Obviously, the officials within the department certainly wouldn't, do this by, just, without some considerable thought and expertise analysis into it. But certainly, the people of Nova Scotia do need some more detail, particularly here in Metro, Mr. Speaker. The minister already has a piece of legislation before this House called the Capital Transportation Authority. I mean, what are the implications of this piece of legislation vis-a-vis HRM? Who's going to pay for it? Is it going to be the provincial taxpayers? Is it going to be the property taxpayers of HRM? Or who's going to pay for it? The minister has not provided enough detail. Everything seems to be general frameworks and kind of almost like a platitudinal approach to certain issues in somewhat of a fuzzy manner, so as to make it appear very user-friendly to the people of Nova Scotia and good news legislation, when in fact there's very little detail and very little substance to these pieces of legislation. And I believe the minister owes an explanation, particularly to the people in the Halifax Regional Municipality, as to how this will impact on themselves, not just from a driving point of view, not just from a safety point of view, not just from an environmental point of view, but also, Mr. Speaker, who's going to pay for it and how is it going to be paid for, Mr. Speaker. So I would leave that and those other issues that I referred to with regards to the trucking industry, because that is a major concern, particularly in view of the fact that the container terminal business is supposed to increase by upwards of 50% over the next 10 years from the Halifax port, and that in itself will create considerable pressures on the traffic flows here in Metro. The issue of that increased truck traffic down through the main corridors in the commercial sector of Halifax, that has not been addressed. It's an issue that's been addressed by the Greater Halifax Partnership and a number of other stakeholders, Mr. Speaker. The number of domestic vehicles, cars, and small trucks that will be using the main streets in the corridor of Halifax, I believe it's estimated to increase by another 75,000 vehicles over the next 10 to 15 years. There is no long-term strategy to deal with that. There's no material, there's no evidence, there's no detail of any form to be able to deal with that, either through the Capital Transportation Authority or through this particular piece of legislation. So this ad hoc approach to some very serious and long-term issues, Mr. Speaker, which will have a major impact on rural Nova Scotia. And to give you an example, this proposal on Highway 113 that's being proposed to alleviate the traffic problems between Hammonds Plains and I forget the other street, but essentially it's from Highway 103 to Highway 102, and this new proposed highway, which is supposed to reduce the amount of time for truck traffic coming into Metro and alleviate the pressure on the residential areas, and that's supposed to be a big cost saving for people, particularly in the western and the southwestern part of the province. But Mr. Speaker, who's going to pay for this $30 million project? That was the initial cost estimate. Now, some estimates are upwards of between $50 and $60 million. Is that going to be the Halifax regional taxpayers that will pay for that? Or is it going to be part of a federal-provincial agreement? Or what are we really looking at, Mr. Speaker? So all these issues do tie in to issues such as these roundabouts that the minister is referring to. Now, I don't know how he plans on dealing with the Armdale Rotary, or if in fact it's just the three that he's referred to yesterday during his press conference. With that, Mr. Speaker, there'll be considerable time and opportunity to further debate on these particular issues, not as they impact specifically on the taxpayers and the motorists within Halifax Regional Municipality, but indeed for all Nova Scotians. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The honourable member for Halifax Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I know that second reading is intended to be a debate on the principle of the bill. However, this bill is a grab bag of measures, amendments to the Motor Vehicle Act, which have no one thing in common. They're really about a whole variety of different topics. So I'm going to beg the Speaker's indulgence as I stand to address one specific section. I know that's not common on second reading, but what I would like to address is this issue of the roundabouts or rotaries that have been addressed by the Minister, mentioned by my colleague from Pictou West, and also from the last speaker. Mr. Speaker, I know that rotaries can work. I've lived in Europe, I've driven in Europe. They are in Great Britain, which I'm most familiar with. They are the preferred method for dealing with intersections. And when you have a whole country who's used to dealing with traffic flow that way, they can work quite well. They're not perfect, and anybody who gets stuck in the gridlock around London can tell you that there's more to traffic flow than just how you deal with intersections. In Nova Scotia, as far as I know, there's 3 rotaries. There's the one up in Port Hastings, just right beside the Cancer Causeway. And there's the one in Pictou County, which my colleague, the member for Pictou West, referred to. But I've never driven on either of those at a time when traffic was heavy, so they never posed any particular issue. The third rotary, though, is one that is mostly in my riding, and so that's the one that I'd like to address to discuss how this bill might impact on the Armdale Rotary. The Armdale Rotary is a small piece of land. It's actually, as traffic circles go, considering the volume it deals with, is actually relatively small. Surely a land area that's not much greater than the width of Province House here, the width of the property of Province House, and yet it deals with a great deal of traffic. That rotary is the junction of 3 different ridings. So that tiny little piece of land is actually in 3 different provincial constituencies. About 60% of it is in my constituency of Halifax Fairview. And about 20% of it is in the riding of my colleague, the member for Halifax Atlantic, and the other 20% is in the riding of my colleague for Halifax Chebucto. So this rotary is very important to the quality of life of the people who live in our constituencies. And I'll mention in particular my constituency, because among the very busy roads that join there are Joseph Howe Drive, St. Margaret's Bay Road, and the Herring Cove Road, all of which are busy roads in their own right, and they all feed into this rotary, not to mention the other very busy roads, Chebucto Road and Quinpool Road, which also feed into the rotary. So no wonder the Armdale Rotary has been a bit of a nightmare, Mr. Speaker. I remember my first experience driving on the rotary is you drive into this circle, of course, and you've never seen one before, because where I grew up there were no rotaries. And so when you move to Halifax and you hit this thing, and you're not really expecting it because there's no signs telling you that it's up ahead, and then you hit this thing, and the first thing you see is a signal, a traffic signal you've never seen in your life before, and which I hope never to see again. The red light with the straight green arrow. So at the same time, what it's telling to the person who's new to this rotary is stop and go at the same time. And no wonder people get confused. And so you're on the verge of this rotary, and you're not quite sure what you're supposed to do. I had some previous experience with British roundabouts, so I thought I was supposed to yield. So I did until, you get honked at from behind, and you realize the people behind you expect you to go, but then there's people in the rotary who don't look like they're about to slow down, so it's very confusing. Of course, Mr. Speaker, now, all these years later, I consider myself a veteran of the Rotary. Now I laugh at others. Now I know who the strangers and the visitors and the tourists are by the confused way that they deal with the Rotary. And it's very obvious when people are dealing with the Rotary for the first time. So we need to do something. But what is surprising to most people, I think, Mr. Speaker, is what the current law of Nova Scotia actually says about rotaries. Because some people assume the law either says nothing or that it embodies the one-on-one rule, but it does neither. In fact, the change the minister is proposing is actually a very small change. Because what the law of Nova Scotia says today, I'm not going to read it, Mr. Speaker, but if I can summarize it, it is that if you're in the Rotary and it's safe to go, then you go. And it says if you're entering the Rotary and it's safe to go, then you go. And that is the law of Nova Scotia today, and has been the law of Nova Scotia for a long time. And what Nova Scotians have done is take this somewhat confusing law, which is if it's safe to go, then go, and they've turned it into the so-called one-on-one rule, the give-and-go rule, which I think, Mr. Speaker, is an embodiment of the finest traditions of Nova Scotia. Yes. Mr. Speaker, it is an embodiment of good manners on the road. It is the embodiment of politeness, which is that you go and then I will go. There is no other country on earth that I know of that has developed this rule, but it's a rule based on experience. And it's a rule based on, if I may say, the personality of the Nova Scotia driver. And it works. No, it's not perfect, but it works. If everybody knows the one-on-one rule, and of course that's the problem, is not everybody knows it, or not everybody respects it, but if you know it, then the traffic flows. So now the traffic engineers come to us and say, oh, there's a better way. There's a better way. We should do this differently. And you know what, Mr. Speaker, maybe there is a better way, but we're going to have a problem. Now that everybody's used to the one-on-one rule at the Armdale Rotary, now we're going to have to get them used to a completely different rule, which is that if you're in the circle, you have the right of way until you get out of the circle, and anybody waiting to get on has to wait. Okay, now that is a good rule, but it's a change. It reminds me of what I was told happened in Newfoundland when they joined Confederation, because of course in 1949, when they joined Confederation, they were British colonies, so they were driving on the left side of the road. And they were joining Canada, which drove on the right side of the road. So they had to do the switch, but they felt there was going to be an issue with public education, so they thought they would phase it in with trucks the first year and then cars. Okay. At least I know who's paying attention to me anyway, Mr. Speaker. But seriously, there is a problem with public education here, because this stuff only works. It only works if everybody is following the same rule. But I think more important than that, Mr. Speaker, is will this fundamentally make traffic flow better on Nova Scotia's busiest traffic circle? And Mr. Speaker, I don't believe that the answer is yes. I simply don't believe it. I am far from convinced that this small change in the rule, because don't be mistaken, Mr. Speaker, no one in this House should be mistaken that about the change in the Rotary rule is actually a big change. It's actually a very small change. The only thing that's being changed, the only thing, is that where the law now says that if you're trying to enter the circle, if you're in the circle, you can only proceed if there's no immediate danger. That's being removed. Otherwise, the law is essentially staying the way it is today. So what it is, instead of saying both of you yield to each other, it just says everybody coming in has to yield to the person going around. So this is a very light change, Mr. Speaker, and this is not going to, in my opinion, solve the problem of the Armdale Rotary, because the fundamental problem is a lot bigger than that. and it's one that this province needs to deal with. It's one that HRM needs to deal with before they're going to convince anybody that this is going to make traffic move better. The problem fundamentally is one of development. Mr. Speaker, there are two reasons why I'm not convinced that this rule is going to be of any benefit to the people of my constituency. And I want to focus in particular on the people of the St. Margaret's Bay Road, Mr. Speaker, which I've talked to people who've lived on that road for 40 years, and they would tell me 40 years ago there might be one car every half hour. One car every half hour. These are people who've lived in the same house for 40 years. 40 years ago, there was maybe a car every half hour. Now it is the major gateway for people coming from the western mainland onto the Halifax Peninsula. And it is still, to all intents and purposes, a country road, which is what it used to be. It is still that. It's narrow, it's twisty, there are houses close by on both sides, and it is now a major traffic artery, to the chagrin of everybody living on that road. And what does HRM do? Do they talk about maybe limiting development out in the Timberley Prospect Way until they've got a global solution to our traffic problems, Mr. Speaker? No, they talk about changing the rules at the Rotary, essentially changing the traffic signals. Mr. Speaker, recently HRM approved 8,000 new residential housing lots out in the Timberley area. 8,000. A substantial number of whom are going to come pouring down the St. Margaret's Bay Road, making a bad traffic problem even worse. And what is HRM talking about? They're talking about moving traffic more quickly through the Armdale Rotary. So that's the first problem, is one of rampant development. It's not just out on the western side, but it's also down the Purcell's Cove Road. There's a controversial development proposed down that way, down the Williams Lake area. Substantial development out in Herring Cove Road, Ketch Harbour, Sambro, all of which have become popular places to live. But if those people want to get onto Halifax Peninsula, they've got one choice, and one choice only, and that's to go through the Armdale Rotary. So why can't HRM deal with this as a global issue, as development equals traffic, rather than saying, here's the development issue, here's the traffic issue, and acting as if they're not connected? That's the first reason why I don't believe that this change is going to do one bit of good for people who need to get through the Armdale Rotary, which I might add, Mr. Speaker, I avoid at all costs during rush hour. Morning rush hour, afternoon rush hour, I wouldn't go near the Rotary because it is such a difficult spot to get through. But anyway, so development's the first reason why it won't work. The second reason is the well-known traffic phenomenon that if you make traffic flow more smoothly, all it does is encourage more people to take that route, Mr. Speaker. So even if the theory turns out to be true, and we change the rules and it moves traffic more smoothly through the Armdale Rotary, even if that's true, moving them more quickly to the bottlenecks at Shabukta Road and Quinpool Road, Mr. Speaker, even if it's true, which I don't believe, all that does is it sends a message to people that now it's okay to go to the Rotary. So people who avoid it will now say, okay, I'll take my chances on the Rotary because traffic is moving better. And so instead of solving a problem, all you do is get more traffic moving faster. And you have the same problem or worse, Mr. Speaker. Nobody in this House, I assure the members of this House, nobody in this House would want to live on the St. Margaret's Bay Road because of the traffic volume, the traffic noise, the dust, the vibration, all the problems those people have to put up with. And they sure wouldn't want to live on St. Margaret's Bay Road if we changed the rotaries just so more traffic moves through faster. I would like to see the province look at this and look at all of the issues. I'd like to see HRM do that. I'd like to see the councillor who was quite happy to get all the media attention on the eve of a municipal election promising big changes to the Armdale Rotary. I'd like to see them explain to the people on the Bay Road how it is that these changes are going to improve their quality of life, Mr. Speaker. And that is why I approached this particular provision, which has gotten a lot of media attention, which has certainly got the minister's attention. He handed out to every member of the legislature today a glossy brochure on roundabouts, which doesn't address these development issues, these traffic flow issues at all. The pretty pictures just saying theoretically this will make things move faster. It'll make things move faster if you don't end up having more cars trying to move through, and if everybody learns the rules. So, Mr. Speaker, I think we all need to approach this particular proposal with a certain degree of skepticism. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to rise and talk on this bill, Bill number 92, just briefly, as it affects the City of Halifax and really all residents, whether or not we have a rotary or roundabout in our area. As has been mentioned, there's only 5 different routes in which to reach the peninsula from any of the outlying areas. And as Clayton Park is in the mainland north part of Halifax, we do have all of our people having to travel in through either the Fairview Interchange or the Rotary, or perhaps going further afield. But there are only 5 entry points, and all of them tend to get very backed up in the morning. And for some reason, September is worse than any other month of the year, so we've been experiencing it firsthand lately. The Armdale Rotary, as I understand it, the city has looked extensively at alternatives to what could be done in that area, especially in light of the increased traffic that is coming from a lot of new subdivisions that have been approved. And as has been noted, there are literally thousands of new sites approved for homes in that area. So we know that something has to be done. And the cost to convert the Armdale Rotary area into a proper interchange is exorbitant. I think that the city has looked carefully at it. It might be a preferred solution, but the cost perhaps is not justified at this point in time. So I do applaud the government for looking at providing the city with the means to make this change so that they can change the way that the Rotary currently works and improve it really in its safety. Because at the moment there are multiple times when cars are really going forward on good faith or just on the hopes that the other person in the interchange or in the Rotary knows what the rule is, which again is very hit and miss, literally. So I think that it's an important thing for us to be making this change and adopting really what is an international standard for roundabouts. And I was impressed to see in the brochure that the safety has been measured by as much as a 76% reduction in injuries and accidents in the United States where this was introduced, and similar figures in Great Britain and Australia. So the safety factor of it, I think, is paramount and important to recognize. On the bill itself, one of the things that is of interest, of course, is that it is a collection of different measures that are being proposed, different changes to the Motor Vehicle Act. And what I think is missing here, and I'd like to raise it today, is the power that the municipality does not have to control speed limits on residential and in fact, on just city streets. And this has been a big issue in the Clayton Park area, as 2 of the streets in our area actually 4 streets have recently undergone a trial where they were allowed to lower their speed to 40 kilometers per hour from the regular 50. The way the Motor Vehicle Act reads at present, you cannot lower the speed below 50 kilometers per hour on any city or municipal street. And of course, it doesn't go below 50 on any provincial highway, so that's pretty much the lowest official speed limit allowed. Now, where there's dangerous corners or steep inclines, there are cautionary yellow signs that are posted, which encourage people to go slower or to be more cautious. In the municipalities where there are school and playground signs, those signs, again, are only cautionary. They indicate you're in a special zone, be careful. But in other provinces, they are an immediate signal that you slow down. And in fact, I know that in Alberta, the speed limit is 30 in playground and school zones, and it's heavily enforced. So I think that, for safety, we should be looking at speed control, and I think, again, from the quality of life issues for Nova Scotians, particularly in urban areas, we need to be able to control speeds and try speeds below the standard 50 kilometers per hour. Now, the speeds that were tested last summer, that would be a year ago in the summer, in 2003, they actually, the authority to try this trial was given by Order in Council, and it applied to the streets Bayview and Flamingo Drives and 2 feeder streets that come in, one to each of those streets. It was Meadowlark and Gateway. Those 4 streets were posted for 40 kilometers per hour to test to see whether or not that would make a difference to the actual speed. But the trial was very flawed, in my opinion. The HRM was given the authority to try it, and then they were not allowed to educate the public or to draw attention to the trial. Now, I don't know how you can succeed when you're told that you could not have any additional signage, you could not have any additional policing, and in fact, extra signs that the city had posted throughout the distance down Bayview and Flamingo, they were forced to remove. They were only allowed one sign at the top of the street and one at the bottom, despite the fact that there were a number of entry points along the distance of both those roads. And so it was minimal signage and an instruction, Mr. Speaker, for minimal policing, that in those areas they were to get no more traffic attention in terms of policing than any other street. And so we couldn't do any kind of real patrols or even education. We couldn't have a time where people who were exceeding the speed were pulled over and given even warnings so that the word would spread that this was indeed a serious infraction, that this was a serious attempt to lower the speed limits on those streets. So with very minimal policing, or as I say, normal policing on those streets, no public education and minimal signing, what we found was the speed limit just decreased only marginally during that period. The mean speed had only gone down a very small amount and was still over 50K, I think, or around 50K. So what was determined by the province was that was a failed attempt and that we wouldn't try any more lower speed limits. And I would like to say that I thought really it was doomed to failure from the start because of the rules that were applied to that trial. And HRM has countless streets which are residential and very heavily traveled, where speed is an issue in the quality of life for the people that live on those streets. And numerous other provinces have provided their municipalities with the authority to determine themselves where there's a judicious need to lower the speed limit. And I think that through legislation, this is really something that would ideally have been included in this bill before us, because this would have been an ideal opportunity to divest ourselves of that control. I don't think that our provincial traffic planners need to be involved in really issues that are quite, it's minutiae really in the scheme of the province, and yet very important to residents in an individual community like Clayton Park. So, and again, as I say, there are numerous places in Dartmouth and Bedford and other areas where this would be very helpful. The city traffic planners have just, only a few tools basically to apply to lower speed limits or to slow speed. And they haven't had the use of this ability to actually lower speed limits. So they're using other methods like chicanes or speed humps or three-way stops, four-way stops, but those things again are very controlled by what the city traffic authority will permit given the circumstances. So I think the tool of lowering speed limits should be given to the municipality because it will really help them to address some very serious concerns of their residents. And again, so I would call on the province to review that as perhaps a future bill, because I think the need is tremendous, and I would also chastise the province for interfering in the way the city did test that lowered speed limit to see if it would work, because the trial was not given a proper chance to succeed. And as I say, after 6 months, it was pulled out, and we're back to square one with many other streets. Really, even in my own riding, many people asking for lower speed limits, which the city doesn't have the power to give. So I would call on the Minister of Transportation to perhaps consider that for a future amendment to the Motor Vehicle Act, because I think it's tremendously important. Again, to go back to Bill number 92, I think as written, the idea of improving the flow within these roundabouts, changing the rules in roundabouts, is something that certainly merits study, and I think introducing it and allowing it to be tried here is important. The idea of public education has been mentioned, and I think it's tremendously important that we do just that. Now, today we were given a very nice-looking brochure on how rotaries and roundabouts work, but I'm not sure who exactly would receive this kind of a brochure, and in fact, whether the cost of something like this is really justified. I think it is important that members of the House of Assembly do understand what the change is about, but I sometimes question when we produce these nice-looking documents exactly what purpose they will serve and whether they will be, in fact, of any use to the public. I think our best way of informing the public is through the media, and I know that HRM has tried to do that in their initial unveiling of this project. And I think it is a sign that the councillors and HRM Council have been trying to grapple with the severe congestion on the one rotary we do have, the Armdale Rotary, and trying to say how can we improve this at a minimal cost, without looking at major construction of an interchange. And therefore, I think that that's showing that they're being prudent in terms of trying to manage the city's money. So I think it's certainly worthy of a trial, and we're anxious to hear of anybody who might have various viewpoints on this at law amendments. As I sit on the Law Amendments Committee, I'll be looking for that. And I would hope that HRM will come forward and indicate their support of these changes. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I'll conclude my remarks.
Thank you. Recognize all member for Halifax Atlantic.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the opportunity to speak to this bill with its many very valuable changes, some small but many useful, although perhaps they need a little more refinement. The major thing, however, which gets everybody's attention is, of course, the distinction between the rotary and the roundabout. And to some degree, I will be sorry to see changes if they actually work. I'm not sure that that's going to be a danger, though. The fact of the matter is that the rotary is a magnificent health promotion device and a tremendous source of conversation, as well as the origin of multiple religious conversions. Most people get through the rotary by closing their eyes and praying briefly. And I know that because I'm not the only one. There are the other ones who get around the rotary by walking. I see people walk huge distances to town every morning to avoid doing it. I think we should be funding it as a health promotion initiative, Mr. Minister. The worst thing that could happen to me when I was a child on my way to school, being driven by my father, was to get caught behind old Mr. Keating, who was driving his horse and wagon from the St. Margaret's Bay Road down that winding country road to collect slops for his pigs from the city restaurants. You saw him get on that rotary before you, his turn came before yours, and you knew your number was up. You were going to be getting a late slip by the time you got there. It was bad news. Story's the same now. What amuses me, though, as much as anything, is that nobody knows exactly how big the rotary is. Nobody knows exactly how many roads into the rotary there are. And it's always a subject for conversation. Any party you can jumpstart immediately by saying the words Armdale Rotary. As I say, we don't know how big it is. We don't know how many roads there are into it, although we know very clearly how many roads there are out of it. And worst of all is the fact that on some of those routes, you go in on a 3-lane road, and the lanes have yet to be painted because there is a spot on each of those routes where those 3 lanes suddenly become 2. But the lines have never been painted. Nobody has actually gone in to figure out where, well, I was going to say where the rubber hits the road, but that's not what hits what. Anyway, somebody is going to have to make some decisions about the physical construction, just the lane marking. No amount of rule changing is going to make a difference there. Still, the rotary is a good thing in many ways. Often hear it referred to as a bottleneck. I think it's more of a choke valve, because you can get around the rotary, as my colleague pointed out, as quickly as you want. But the rotary is not the problem. It's the other side of the rotary that's the issue. You're on a peninsula. You are on something that was built to be defensible. Once you're there, where do you go? I hear stories. People say, oh, that Armdale Rotary. And then they tell me that it took 13 and a half minutes to migrate the 3 blocks from the rotary to Quinpool and Oxford or Quinpool and Connaught. The problem is not the rotary. The rotary is a salvation. Don't know quite what the answer is going to be, but it's probably something about putting a few less cars onto the peninsula. And that's where another piece of this bill, although it doesn't actually deliberately, it doesn't give the entire piece of the picture, it does do one useful thing, which is that it includes buses in the transit priority system. And there has been talk at various times about changing the lanes at Quinpool Road to allow for roads to adjust for the time of day. It'd be nice to change the transit priority signals and then put transit buses on that would in fact follow those, and that may help to reduce the traffic around the rotary. As my colleague pointed out, though, there is that phenomenon of induced traffic, which is, put simply, build it and they will come. You improve the roads, make them easier, faster to travel, and more people will enjoy the easier, faster to travel roads that you've built. That's going to be a problem for the peninsula. And as long as we're putting literally thousands of new houses on the outskirts of the peninsula and intending the people in those houses to conduct their commercial, social, and administrative lives on the peninsula, we are going to have a bottleneck at the Rotary. And I say, long live the bottleneck. Thank you, Mr. Minister.
Honourable Member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll have a brief comments on Bill number 92. Living and representing the area of Sackville, it's amazing to see the growth out in that area and the potential growth and the future growth that's going to happen over the next several months and years. One of the things that is important to a lot of people out in that riding and the surrounding riding is the public transportation system. As we see it presently, it is a chore to enter into the city using public transportation methods and the system itself. I'm encouraged by the government's proposed legislation to change or allow changes in the public system throughout HRM and in the province, especially when it comes to the priority lanes for buses, which I think they recognize two important areas in HRM, such as Cole Harbour and, of course, Sackville. Because it's not just the people in Sackville or just the people in Cole Harbour that use those areas to access public transportation into the city. If you enter or leave the city early in the morning, you just notice the numbers of vehicles that come from the valley, especially that cut through Sackville. And if we make it more accessible or quicker for them to use public transportation from areas like Sackville, that I think it's important that we can ensure a reduction in emissions through vehicles and hopefully improve our environment. Growing up out in Sackville, using public transportation to come into the city for education and for work purposes, there was always a need to recognize that priority lanes need to be in place. If you go to any large city throughout Canada, you see these used mostly in areas that the traffic flows are increased into the metropolitan area. So I think it is important that we allow this change to take place, and that I think it's important to people that live, especially in my riding, to see that potentially using public transportation will be a quicker means to enter into the city, which I think is important. On a Sunday drive from Sackville to the city, it could take you about 15 minutes to get into the city, but during those rush hour and peak hours where there's many vehicles trying to maneuver their way into the city, it could take you up to an hour and a half to enter the city. So I hope by changing legislation to allow these priority lanes to be implemented is important, and I'm looking forward to that. The other thing this legislation talks a little bit about is the rotary and roundabouts. And over the years, I have had interactions with the rotaries when it came to my profession as a paramedic. There's been many times over the years that I have gone on a call to the Rotary, especially Armdale Rotary, where the vehicles are significantly damaged when they do have a collision there. And the thing that's important about the Rotary is that, like my colleague was mentioning earlier about the one-in-one rule, where if you're from the city, we recognize the need to allow one person to go and then you go. But it's when you see people from away, tourists come into the city, or people from other provinces, or even people from other parts of the province come into the city and find themselves descending upon the Armdale Rotary, is when the accidents occur. One thing I do want to stress is that if there are going to be changes to that area of the city and that rotary, if we go to the roundabout system, is that public education needs to be a high priority for not only HRM but the province, because I think you may see an increase in the collision rate there if you all of a sudden just change the rules. So public education, I think, is going to be the key when you make changes like this, especially to roundabouts or rotaries. I'm encouraged by the safety statistics in the brochure that the minister distributed. I mean, if collision rates are down and injuries are down in other parts of the country or other parts of the world, such as the U.S. and Great Britain, because they've changed things, and I think that's a great move, and I hope that these stats do come true if there is a change there. And I'm encouraged by this piece of legislation, and look forward to it going to law amendments and seeing if there's anything that needs to be changed on it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Now, a member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to say just a few words on Bill number 92. I'd like to start off with the roundabouts, and I've got a long memory about the Micmac Rotary in Dartmouth, and the 2 hours and 3 hour waits through the middle of the day when you're trying to get through that engineering, I won't say the proper words for that, but the engineering blunder, I suppose, that was put in place when that rotary was installed. And today, when you drive through it and the terrific amount of traffic that goes through the Parklow, it really shows that putting the investment in place to start with really pays off. There's been some discussion about putting roundabouts in place because it will save some funds short term for the municipalities and probably the province on these things, but it's actually more expensive to put a roundabout in place and then find out 10 or 20 years later you've got to put an interchange that you should have put in place to start with. And the other thing that concerns me, the minister indicated they're going to paint an airstrip and they're going to try this out. So I would have thought they would have tried it out before they brought it to the legislature to see if it's really going to make sense. So it scares me a little bit when the engineers come up with this beautiful glossy brochure that dear knows what cost that costs the taxpayers in Nova Scotia, trying to sell us on this roundabout theory. And anyone that lives in Halifax or Dartmouth that's gone through the rotaries, and these aren't a whole lot different than the rotaries, although they do appear to have some advantages, and the long wait times and the problems with that. So it's a serious change in the way the traffic is going to flow, and you can look at the intersection points here where people on the modern roundabout that they have here, the vehicle-to-vehicle conflict and the vehicle-to-pedestrian conflict. You can easily see that if a pedestrian gets in, or a couple of pedestrians gets in one of these crosswalks, it can stop the whole interchange. It can stop the whole thing. It'll stop if you get enough cars trying to go in that same direction. So it's going to be interesting to see how they work if indeed they go ahead. And I still remember the Micmac Rotary, and sat in there for hours and hours and hours in the middle of the day, not even rush hour, trying to get from one side to the other, and it just simply didn't work. That was an engineering fiasco, to say probably the terminology properly. And I hope that we're not going to create some more engineering fiascos that long after the engineers that designed these ones are gone and the people are still struggling to get the traffic moving, that they have to rebuild this thing again. So what be the sense of spending money twice? I think it's time in this province we start to realize that our population is growing, our traffic patterns are growing, and it's time that we really looked at proper engineering for interchanges and facilities that's going to allow traffic to move. And I've got a little bit of a problem too with the engineers. I mean, we have a problem on the number 7 Highway 107 down over the hill where it meets at the 111 intersection. And the municipality had approved a third lane to allow traffic into Cole Harbour. So they started construction this spring, and lo and behold, what are they putting in? Curbs and sidewalks. They not even took any consideration for a third lane here, which would have seriously alleviated the traffic patterns, which is going to affect us all. Well, it's no third lane. It's sidewalks and curbs now, so that means when they rip up the sidewalks and curbs, which they will have to do put a third lane in there eventually when it finally gets back downtown to downtown Dartmouth, which is heading in that direction now with the traffic backup, where people trying to get through the intersection will have to rip all that up again, put pavement down, probably put the sidewalks back down, which you very seldom see pedestrians in that area. There's really no reason for them to travel there, although sidewalks are a great thing and a great safety thing for people in the community and very important. But they could have easily